So thank you. That was going to be my next statement. Thank you, Taryn. So for those of you that are here and on time, thank you very much. We appreciate you joining us for our last Bee Bites of the year. This program is going to be called Tech Forum next year. We're looking forward to getting some equally engaging conversations going there. I'm excited about the conversation and the panel that we have scheduled for you today as well. So a couple of public service announcements, which I'll probably repeat at the end also. But we are starting our planning, obviously, well into it for next year, nailing down dates, locations, and topics. If any of you have topics that are of specific interest to you, please feel free to reach out to Taryn at thecircuit.net so we can roll that into consideration for how we look at things for next year. Probably more importantly, I'm hoping that everyone here has seen the information on Tech Takeover scheduled for January 20th at March 1st Brewery. No cost to attend, no sponsorships, nothing, just show up, drink a beer or a beverage of your choice, $1 for every pint sold. March 1st is contributing to the Reds Community Fund. We'd love it if some of you maybe tapped some of your organizations for a slightly larger donation, as we have had someone step up and agree to a task if we hit $10,000. So it's kind of a kickoff for this. That event is purely social, just to get anybody and everybody together that's in IT. You do not have to be a member. You can be a college student in IT, all the way up to a retired person. So we look forward to seeing you all at that event at March 1st on the 20th. Please follow the circuit on LinkedIn and or be looking in our email newsletter for additional information and kind of tidbits about that event. So having said that, I want to thank ATC. They've been our outstanding partner for the Bee Bites series this year. We really appreciate it. And obviously we can't do these things without help from our partners. So to kick off our last event of this year, Dave Goodwin from ATC will be our moderator. And I'm going to turn it over to you, Dave. I'll be monitoring the chat and interject with questions as they come up.
All right, great. Thanks, Tracy. And welcome everybody today. Thank you. ATC, as Tracy said, has been sponsoring the breakfast and brunch bites for the entire year. I'll give you a small little blurb on us, which is we specialize in 4 main areas: voice, network, cloud, and cybersecurity. Those are our 4 core areas of expertise. And we're a consulting firm that has a tried and proven process that we take each and every one of our clients through. So we just moved into our new digs after 22 years in business, and only 5.5 years ago working out of my house. The team has grown considerably, and now we're in a new office space in Liberty Center, and we look to host events like this in the future if we can get them away from virtual and get out in person. So enough on me and ATC. I am the managing partner here and also the co-founder of Advanced Technology Consulting, or ATC. So I have the pleasure or the privilege of announcing our panelists today. And I'm going to have them I'll introduce them and then let them kind of give a little bit on themselves, and then we'll get right into the questions. So I'll start with Tim Maxey, who is responsible for enterprise data at Great American Insurance. Tim?
Thank you. So I'm Tim Maxey with Great American Insurance Company. So over emerging technology and enterprise data, managing those portfolios there. And one of the things that I really like to focus on is the technology and innovation that's really driving not just the insurance industry, but as our world as a whole. And we'll talk more on that. But thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right, great. Thanks, Tim. George Casey's data scientist at RSM.
Yeah, thanks. I'm George Casey out of Denver. I'm a principal with RSM. I lead our advanced analytics practice where we do artificial intelligence, machine learning. And I also lead our technology experience center here in Denver, where we look at emerging technologies like IoT, AI, augmented reality. So excited to be part of the panel today.
Great, thank you, George. And last but not least, I have Scott Roth, the Chief Technology Officer, CTO at Hive Networks.
Hey, happy holidays, everybody. I'm Scott Roth. I'm actually doing independent advisory consulting for startup companies right now while I look for my next adventure. I am the former CTO of Hive Networks, but also I was the vice president of product development at SureX Health and Myriad Genetics. Just love working with cutting edge technology to solve problems that haven't been solved before. And some of the topics that we're going to talk about today, I definitely think are things that everybody on this call needs to keep in mind and prepare for the future, because the world's evolving quickly. Thank you.
Thank you, Scott. So let's move right into questions. The first one would be, what emerging technologies are you seeing take hold? And you might want to touch on things like augmented reality, mixed reality, Web 3.0, NFT, blockchain, AI/ML. I'll let you guys kind of stake to a starving animal. Take it away. Whoever wants to go first.
Yeah, I might start if that's all right. I kind of brought my prop today. Some folks have seen this, some maybe not, but this is a Microsoft HoloLens. So when we talk about augmented reality or mixed reality, very important kind of distinction from virtual reality. And virtual reality is when we're creating an entirely immersive experience, entirely digital. I have no more connection with the real world. More, in my experience, about gaming and entertainment. I think when we think augmented reality, now it's like, how can I take what I'm seeing in the physical real world and take advantage of a digital layer? Is there information I could get that's going to append? If I'm a manufacturer, can I see real-time statistics from my shop floor? Can I identify potential safety concerns or issues? Can I bring information about my backlog? So kind of taking that physical management by walking around experience and enhancing it with data. And I would just say kind of the last comment, especially in the last 2 years, to your point, David, what are we seeing? Not being physically present, but being able to extend experiences using technology like this to people who I can't physically have come on my shop floor to do things like inventory or
We're not going to that, are we?
control. I think it is
because they were watching
exciting
Grace.
and important.
Oh, I didn't see that message.
Oh, well, he didn't answer. Anita just told me last night they had Grace already. That's why
Let
I
me
thought
see
he
if I can mute. I
responds
think
no.
that's coming from Laura. I can't mute.
Huh?
Can you mute Laura, Tracy? Or Laura, can you make? Thank you. All right, back to where we were. Sorry about that, George.
Yeah, no, I think I'd love to hear kind of what Scott and Tim might think about that.
No, I agree. There's so many things that excite me about augmented reality in terms of even training junior people with senior people, no matter where they live. I see a lot of use cases, and one use case that really was cool and that I saw over the last year was Anderson Windows. I don't know if anybody saw this, but they've got a mobile app that allows customers to kind of configure their own windows and see how it looks in their house. I mean, that saves a lot in the life cycle, but also it allows the consumer to see what the choices they're making and adjust them on the fly. Just really cool stuff there. A lot of really cool stuff since I've been in the world of healthcare for the last 15 years in terms of medical training, simulating real world situations where new people or new situations, people can go through the procedures and really learn and make errors or make adjustments in a non-real world situation. So a lot of different aspects here in terms of augmented reality that really excite me coming up, including some things in education, tourism, et cetera.
It seems like to me, we talk a lot around here about the quote to cash interval, right? The part where you kind of get a new opportunity and you work them through, and other people may have other terminology, but it seems like the ability in your Anderson Consulting example that some of the things that may slow down that purchase and that process and some of the errors that might be made along the way might be able to be eliminated as a result of technology. Would you agree with that, Scott?
Absolutely, 100%.
All right. Thank you. And Tim?
Yeah, I think in the insurance space, there is a variety of utility for augmented reality. Everything from training. So when you're talking about risks that we have to assess, one of those risks is how accurately either an underwriter or a claims adjuster assesses something. And so training is hugely important. And so when you're talking about commercial policies, whether those be buildings or equipment, or a variety of things, having an augmented reality as a way to do some training before people go out into the field, kind of what to look for. And also, from a customer standpoint, I think, showing what are some potential risks inherent in, let's say, a builder and a developer. So what are some of the risks that they may not see right off the bat but with augmented reality, we can show, okay, this is kind of what the life cycle of this risk could look like if we don't do this, this, or this. So it becomes beneficial not just for the company, but for the end customer as well.
And I think that's actually a really interesting point, Tim. And the way when we kind of think about including the end customer, and Scott highlighted this, it's not just about the goggles. I mean, everybody's got an augmented reality device, right? And we don't necessarily think about that, but kind of, can I extend this capability to those endpoints, whether it's technicians in the field, and I can use a field service kind of context where in the past, we had to train everyone who was in the field to that same master level of competence so that they'd be effective. Now I can centralize that expertise and bring in kind of more junior resources because I can extend the experience through this technology. And I think the other thing, when you bring up insurance, we're seeing interesting things where we think about it in the terms of who's consuming kind of that digital layer. Is it the person wearing the device, the person looking at the phone? Sometimes it's more, can I take that data stream or that video stream from the device and now use things like digital measurements where I'm not having to physically measure, I can actually scan a space. Insurance, we're seeing people use it for safety, where can I measure compliance with PPE? Are people wearing helmets? Are they wearing safety goggles or masks? So I think it's this interesting idea of opening up a new stream of data through kind of computer vision, and augmented reality is just a source. So lots of opportunity there.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I think one of the things, while insurance has been around for a while, one of the big drivers to offer competitive advantage to the customers is how do we help them offset the risk and understand the risk better. And I think that's an excellent example when you think about OSHA and potential workers' comp claims. When you have a client and say, okay, let's talk about, put on these goggles and let's take a look at some different scenarios. What may happen, what may not, and what are the probabilities of that, and then that walks hand in hand with some of the other emerging technologies that I think we'll get to, such as IoT sensors and things like that.
All right, great. Thank you all. So let's move on to the next question. What has to be in place to get started on these two technologies? You have the technology version of that, and then you have the people part of that. So what do you think needs to take place in order to get started?
Yeah, I'll go ahead and kick off with that one. So I'm definitely hyper aware of the talent need. And with some of these, I mean, when you're talking about any emerging technology in the finance sector, it can take years and years to fully roll out or to fully understand what the potential is if something is definitely a budding technology. I know augmented reality has been around for a while, but let's take a look at the next thing. And so the talent pipeline really needs to be this long-term play. I think companies do a pretty good job of college engagement, undergrad engagement, maybe some high school engagement. But when you're thinking about emerging technologies and innovations and where the world's headed, you got to have your pulse on what the kids in junior high and what the kids in upper primary school, what they're being taught, the ways they're being taught, how their identities are being formed. Let's face it, if you are in primary school, the things you envision yourself most as are a GI Joe or a sports player, and so as our identities form, if we can get in there and start shaping those identities into, hey, you know what, you could be a really cool technologist, and you start making those subtle shifts, and you start partnering with academic institutions and shaping your talent pipeline, then you're not competing against such a wide array of industries by the time they get to high school. Or by the time people get to high school, some people may have thought, hey, technology is for nerds, or hey, technology is just something that is just not for me. It's way out of my wheelhouse, because that part of their internal dialogue has already been formed. So if we can get in there ahead of it, we can put ourselves at a serious advantage as technologists.
Scott?
I agree with you, Tim. I think taking another angle, and something I've seen work in companies of mine in the past, is allowing the really bright, smart technical people on your team, giving them space to experiment and learn these new technologies. I mean, many of us have great people on staff, brilliant people, but they're heavily focused on the day-to-day deliverables. At Surex, what we created were what we called internal hackathons, where people could look at the latest technology and play with it and honestly come up with potential solutions that would in turn help the business. So I think giving space internally to these technology teams is really important. I completely agree with you in terms of I've got 5 kids myself. I'm teaching them technology and getting them into technology. But there's people now that you have on your teams that could really take this new technology and run with it, that already know your business and they know how it would fit into your business. So I think taking both of those angles really will help us evolve in the future. But honestly, allowing your technology teams to do this stuff, it creates stickiness of your technology team to stick with your company because they're working and getting to play with the latest and greatest stuff. So
yeah,
Scott,
and just to piggyback on that, Scott, I think one of the things we do at RSM, we have 11,000 employees. We do an innovation challenge every year. And the idea is a lot of us think, oh, well, innovation is for, we outsource it, or we think about, Microsoft's innovating on our behalf, or Apple's innovating on our behalf. And they're thinking about technology, but they're not really solving any problems until we apply it to the business. So even expanding beyond a technology team, but thinking about what's the problem to be solved, right? All innovation is kind of united by a problem to be solved. And if we can really think about that in context, then we can recognize, oh, well, Microsoft's done some great things, let's pull it in, because we have clarity around value, around what's going to be a valuable thing to do. And the idea that it's really everybody's responsibility or opportunity, right? We kind of, as an organization, how do we foster innovation? How do we create that space to think about things differently, to think about doing it a new way? But then supporting them with the technical skills, with the outside experimentation, whatever that might be. So I love the idea of kind of bringing that in and letting kind of your asset of your human capital be a real driver for innovation.
I like that a lot. We talk about sharpening the saw. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Stephen Covey's 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. One of the chapters is on sharpening the saw. One of the things that we have to do, that we do 2 to 3 times a week, is we usually have lunch and learns with vendors so that we can be learning their products and services on the what would be the bleeding edge, which is expensive for everybody. We just want to be learning there so that when it becomes more mainstream and it's solid, it's stable, we've learned how to solve customers' problems. It's one thing to have the technology. I think you all have spoken to, okay, so we have the technology, but what problem is it solving for the individual business or the respective business, right? And to do that, you got to get outside the weeds. It's no different than the C-level saying, we got to do an off-site retreat so we get out of the day-to-day so we can actually think about vision and strategy and so forth. So I feel like you guys kind of all nailed that on the head. Thank you very much. Anybody else want to add something there? All right, I'll move on to the next one. How do you support the tech? Okay, so you have it. You let them play with it. Now, how do you put the security on it? How do you put the controls on it? When do you just let it be a free for all so people can think the most creative and the applications for it? How do you support that technology?
Yeah, I think that's really interesting, David, just because a lot of times we're so excited by the tech, we don't necessarily think about the risks or the ramification it brings. And so we break something and then we recover. And even we're seeing a good example, and Tim brought up a little bit around kind of health, or I'm sorry, Scott brought up healthcare. We see AI in healthcare, really interesting capability. I have some academic colleagues that would say, if you're not using AI as part of a large health system, you're committing malpractice, right? You're not doing the best you can for your patients. But what we saw was we had these great models, but the data on which they were trained were biased, and they had actual ethnic bias built in just because of how data was collected, how healthcare services have been delivered over the last 20 years. And so we created these models, we created this great capability, and we go back and look at the results and said, these are not making the best possible recommendations. And so we fix it. So I think we're getting better at recognizing that. But when we think about innovation, we think about starting, it has to be thinking about both sides of the coin. And I think we've gotten better because we've seen a lot of problems with cybersecurity. We've seen ransomware attacks and such. So in thinking about, as we digitally transform and we move more of our paper or processes into a digital experience, we have to think about how are we protecting that? What are the new risks and exposures this has? And not let that stop us, but just go in with eyes open and say, hey, we're going to mitigate this and still capture this value.
I think, along those lines, and this touches on what Scott's doing right now with his career. I think, when you think about emerging technology in an enterprise organization, a theoretical, but also, a tried and true method is to think about them as startups. We've heard the adage, what got you here won't get you there. So when you have an emerging technology and you're playing around, you found something, Great. Hopefully you were aligning what you were playing around with to an existing business use case. Maybe you're just doing exploratory, but now it's time, if you don't have an existing business use case, that's really where you're gonna have to figure out the nuts and bolts of scaling. And you're gonna have to do that in a very methodical way, where you're not gonna launch every capability of this new emerging technology all at once. You're going to let it evolve. You're going to find a specific use case and a specific business unit, and you're going to roll that out to that specific business unit. And that road's going to be a little bumpy, and you're going to learn things, but that's why you don't do a huge push yet. And then you methodically scale from there, I think.
Well, and aligning with the business. I mean, you don't want to push cutting edge technology if it's not going to impact the business. So being aligned with the business and the business side, understanding how strategically and directionally this is going to help the company is a huge win, because if they have buy-in, then you'll be successful.
Yeah, I love that thought, Scott. And I think we get so excited and enamored by the technology that too often we start there and like, oh, this is awesome. I'd love to have a HoloLens. What should I use it for? And we're really, even as software vendors, as services vendors, we think about that. We're like, hey, we've got this solution. Are you interested? We should really be thinking backwards. That should be the last thing we get to. And it should be around, what are the goals of the organization? What are we trying to do? Are we thinking about growth? Are we thinking about, risk mitigation? Are we thinking about productivity and cost? And then we think about strategies. And the last thing we get to are kind of tactics and enablers. So I think we're looking at some interesting ways to help kind of customers explore the potential. And sometimes it's looking internal, sometimes it's looking external. And we have this notion of a business value assessment that would say, hey, our peers on kind of standard financial metrics have a pretty big gap. There's arbitrage there. There's an opportunity to close that. What are the different technologies or capabilities we can employ that help kind of close those gaps and recognize in a given market, there's potential, there's value. And so I think thinking about it from that business perspective really gives clarity and justification as to why we should do these things beyond the experimentation. The hope is you have had experimentation, so now you've got an idea of what it could do, and you kind of bring that together with that business vision, and that's where you kind of get to that kind of rapidly acquired value.
Yeah, George, I think you're exactly right. I think in IT, we kind of get into the habit of, okay, the business wants to implement something, we go implement it, but really when it comes to emerging technology, we have to be one part really trusted partner of the business, really have a pulse on what they're trying to do. And also we have to be one part business psychologist. So when the business comes and says, hey, I have this problem, we don't just react, but we respond, we ask more questions, we peel back that onion to really understand the job we're trying to do or the problem before we even think about the solution.
So Tim, I like the part where you said, what got you here won't get you there. Reminds me of the book, Who Moved My Cheese?
Right, and then the follow-up book, I Moved Your Cheese, yes.
And it seems like in this business, it's always getting moved.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
All right, so if we were to move on to the next question, can you share some, and I know you've done this a little bit, each of you I think have done it a little bit, but maybe more specific for each, even if it's just one for each of you, maybe share some use cases on where you've seen this technology utilized.
Yeah, sure. I can start. We started augmented reality and kind of pivoted to some of the data elements and artificial intelligence. So I'm really interested in how can we use data to better answer questions, and really starting with that. So one of the use cases we're seeing that's exciting is the application of these capabilities we'll describe as auto ML, right? The idea that can I, as a non-trained data scientist, ask some questions about, is there some ability to predict an outcome? So one example we're seeing that's really interesting is anybody that's got a customer churn problem, or what I should say is got a customer churn experience that says, hey, we have customers and some of them stay and some of them leave. Can I predict, by understanding behaviors and demographics, who's likely to leave? And then the second question is, can I impact that? Can I compel kind of the ability to get customers to stay? And so as an example use case, we took a member organization's data, just took kind of in essence an Excel file, not a ton of data. We had maybe 50 or 60,000 rows. We fed it into, in this case, Microsoft's Auto ML feature. And in a matter of, it took me 4 clicks, and then the model generation process ran for a half hour. But I came away with 60 different model algorithms, and one, scored and ranked to high 90% accuracy. So in the sense of the idea that I can apply this, I can consume these technologies now without the kind of major investment. And it's more what we need is the curiosity. We need to kind of be curious as like, is this a question I can answer? So I think that's what we're seeing in terms of this is becoming more consumable and not just theoretical.
Well, I like one thing you touched on there, George, is utilizing the platforms out there instead of reinventing the wheel internally inside of these companies. I mean, I've been part of the Cincinnati technology world for multiple decades now, and the mindset is build internally and not necessarily take advantage of those resources. I'm a big cloud guy. I'm a Microsoft guy. I love the Azure environment, but taking advantage of the tools that they have, so you can have the creativeness on your side and not have to build those solutions in house is something that I really want to highlight that you said. It's really important for the Cincinnati technology world to change their mindset. And I see it slowly changing, but it still has a long way to go.
Yes, Scott, I couldn't agree more. I think one of the reasons that Great American went into UC's innovation hub was to do exactly that. It's to talk with some of the other companies without having to schedule lunches via admins, but just talking with people, around the water cooler, so to say. Hey, I'm thinking about this, and talking about what technologies are already out there. And some companies have implemented things we're thinking about. Some are in different stages of that. Taking a look at some of those lessons learned, not reinventing the wheel, avoiding some landmines, and then coming up with some new and unique solutions that we found. Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you all. We'll move on to the next. How do you think this is going to impact the future of what you do? And in answering that, I'm going to give you like an A and a B. Do you see these trends creating a stronger partnership between business and IT? I have my own thoughts on that, but I'll keep them silent for now. And will these change the way you hire, budget, project management, or project manage? So I'm going to go back to the question, how do you think this is going to impact the future of what you do?
Yeah, I can go ahead and start us off. So definitely will have an impact. I think when we think about how businesses are organized and how it's evolved over time, whether it was, the total quality management of the 90s, or it was, the budding agile environments of the 2000s. And there's been it's constant evolution of how the business works. And we definitely will see a closer partnership between IT and the business in terms of unpacking what those business problems are, what the things they're trying to solve. Again, back to an earlier point, not just being told to implement something, but really just being that trusted advisor, trusted partner, helping them unpack things. I know there's that article that came out in the Wall Street Journal. I understand thematically what they're trying to say, but I think there's a little bit more work to be done in the editor's office on that one. But I certainly think, from our organization, our company president said, a little while ago, by and by, we realized that we're just a technology company that happens to sell insurance. And so it's understanding that blend that is happening, and that natural evolution and hopefully symbiotic relationship.
I'm starting to hear that phrase more often. They Domino's saying they're a technology company that just happens to deliver pizzas, and Mike's Car Wash says we're a technology company that just happens to wash cars. You're starting to hear that where technology really is at the forefront, and therefore, well, I'll let the other guys answer before I chime in there.
Well, and the one thing I want to say is, I've come from the startup world, and I've been in the startup world for a long time now, and alignment with the business is critical for those companies to succeed. And a lot of companies, like you said, say we're a technology company, we do X, Y, and Z. Honestly, the companies that really do align are the ones that are going to succeed, and the other ones are going to continue to struggle. A lot of it's talk. I talk to a lot of companies right now where they say they're leading with technology, but it's secondary. Technology isn't really aligned with the business and helping change and help move the business forward and evolve. So I think leaders like everybody on this call really need to understand their business and go to the business and say, hey, we've got these new things. This is how we can solve X, Y, and Z, where you're not even thinking about because you're not in the technology world. I think we really need to lead with technology, because this world's evolving very quickly, more and more technologies being relied upon, and they're going to be counting on us as technology leaders to help drive us forward.
Yeah, it's funny. I mean, there's an old joke about there are only two industries or two groups that refer to their constituents as users, and it's IT and drug dealers. So I think the idea that, we're blurring those lines, and, in the past is because of the emergence of kind of IT and the emergence of CIO as a function. 50 years ago, it was about, hey, we have to be equipped with really special skills and tools to be able to serve the business, and the business is not going to really understand that application. They're just going to, do what they're told. Versus now we see this emergence of things like no code, low code deployments, or the citizen developer, the citizen data scientist, and we're blurring those lines. And so now it's about, where is IT most strategic, recognizing some of the self-service components in the past, or if I need to change a report, if I need to answer a question, I can now, and not look at that as, hey, they're eroding into my turf, as no, it frees me up to do these other things, to support these innovation challenges and hackathons or whatever else, and really investigate where innovation is, because I've given so much more capability to that business user.
All right, thank you all. You all have so efficiently answered all these questions. We got a little bit of time. I know Keith had a question in the chat. I'm going to throw in a bonus question that we haven't covered at all. So what do you look for, especially as we get into the end of the year? You hear all the greatest things that happen. What are you most looking forward to next year in 2022? What are you looking for? Each of you independently, not related. By the way, if you're number 2 or number 3, it's going to get a little harder because you can't use number 1's answer. What are you looking most forward to?
I'll jump in because I don't want them to steal the answer. I would say what's really exciting me, and I'm seeing some companies take advantage of it, is more, data as an asset, and not necessarily a retained asset within a firm. So this idea of, we sometimes describe it as syndicated data or a data market, where now, in the past, if I were going to try to use data to predict or to answer a question, I looked at what I had. And now the idea that I can rapidly bring in millions of external data sets, whether it's econometric data or it's other industry that really trends or leads my industry, and I can match or find those patterns automatically. Now all of a sudden the excuse of, well, I don't have enough data to answer this question goes away. And it becomes really kind of available to a lot of people that says, well, you may not have this in your historical result. We kind of call it the cold start problem, right? I don't have data that I can use to train a model or to predict, but there's another series of data that's a proxy. It's a very good representation of that. And so we're seeing some companies doing really interesting things, predicting future demand based on kind of the ability to leverage external data sets and make that, ubiquitous and accessible. In the past, it was a brute force exercise.
George, that sounds a little bit like, for those people that embrace that technology sooner, that a little bit sounds like it might level the playing field a little bit in terms of a small company or a startup versus maybe a big, I don't know, Fortune 500 company, because as long as the data is out there, you can run your models on that data. It doesn't have to be specific to yours. You would still have that capability as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we saw some really interesting things where some people who are ahead of the curve did much better through this kind of pandemic experience where nobody had a great data set to predict that. But when I look at series of data that can kind of model or kind of serve as that proxy, I'm going to be much better responding to a lot of the supply chain issues we've seen, a lot of the employee demand and employee worker predictions. So I think it is absolutely something that, to the extent that becomes consumable through some of these platforms, like Scott said, it really is a huge kind of force multiplier.
What do they say? Necessity is the motherhood of invention.
Or crisis, depending.
Yeah, either one. They both fit. It's what are those
Right.
books where you used to have the underline where you could write in whatever word you want? Is it ad lib or
ad libs? Yeah.
Yeah. You can interchange those words.
Exactly. Right. Yeah. When I think about what I'm looking forward to in the next year, it's a little bit on what George talked about. So I am always very interested in what's happening in the world in terms of disruptive strategy and disruptive innovation. And I think when things like COVID happen to the world. I find it sometimes can be a bit of a society accelerator, meaning depending on what your trajectory was, it was accelerated by that event. And I think there are a lot of very interesting startups that are out there that have found some huge acceleration because they were able to be very nimble in what they were doing. And I think that's what I'm most excited to watch. Is what's going to be, what's the next evolution of our business landscape as a whole. And I think, coming from a Fortune 500 company, I think it's not something to be feared. I think it's something to partner with, something to learn from, and I think it's something to embrace.
Great, thank you. Scott, in conclusion.
I've got a couple things. I could talk for probably an hour or two on all the things that excite me coming up here, and I'm sure everybody here can. So in the world of healthcare, something that I've kept my pulse on recently, actually probably over the last 5 years, and I see it emerging and evolving quickly in 2022 is we've got a plethora of data in these electronic health records. We've got a plethora of data in these payer information systems, wearables, marrying the data on wearables, that is specific patient information with that other data, and improving the quality of care and for patients that have rare and chronic conditions is something that excites me next year, because I really see that picking up steam. Because right now, a lot of companies are looking at that EHR data and using machine learning, but they're missing some big pieces there. They're missing the payer information. The payers are looking at that information, but they're also not bringing in patient-specific data in terms of the wearable data that they can get access to. So there's some interesting opportunities there that I know some companies that are in that area that I really look forward to seeing the changes they make. I'll stick in the world of healthcare. The whole Web 3.0 and NFT world definitely interests me a lot when it comes to healthcare on numerous avenues, but the biggest one that interests me is the ability for patients to own their data. Right now, patients, their data is used in studies. They don't know where it ends up. They don't know how it's being used. If the patients own that data, they can be more part of that solution. And I've been part of Learning Health Networks for a couple years now, where the patients, the clinicians, and the researchers are working together to improve the quality of care for patients with rare and chronic conditions. I think the NFT world gives the patients more control and more of a say. And honestly, I think it's going to make a bigger impact on healthcare and how we improve the healthcare system, but also help these people with rare and chronic conditions. So 2 things at the top of my head that really excite me. There's many other things that I could keep going on, but I won't bore you.
Thank you. Thank you all. I'm gonna, we have about 5 minutes before we get into questions. So I'm gonna throw in bonus question number 2, and let's turn that upside down and say, what, as you move into 2022, what cautions do you have? Like the one I just gave you was kind of full steam ahead. What are you eager about? Looking forward to it, love it. This is how it's going to change the world. Now I want to say the other way. Okay, these different things are coming. What's going to potentially keep me up at night? What was caution that or pause that it gives me? What might be that technology or technologies? And we have about 5 minutes between the 3 of you.
I can jump in. Security.
Shocker.
Being in the world, being in the world of healthcare. I mean, it's the utmost importance to keep patients' information secure. And honestly, with emerging technology, from the ground up, you need to keep that in mind in the world of healthcare, which isn't always the case. So I think it's security. I think it's also user experience. A lot of the new technology coming out may be thrown out there with not the best user experience, which therefore your consumers aren't gonna latch on, and it's gonna be harder to get them to gain steam on your platform later. So I think it's user experience and security, the things that keep me up at night all the time, especially security.
George, Tim?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the kind of the softball would be the idea of just that, I don't know if it was Harry Potter, it was kind of the constant vigilance, right? The idea that I have to be on the lookout, understand where my weaknesses and exposures are, not let it be a barrier to transformation, but make it as part of the process. Hey, as we do these things, we're going to think about that. I know, I mean, I think Scott's healthcare example is great. And I don't remember when I saw the statistic, but it was the notion that, healthcare data in the black market was 10 times more valuable than credit card data, right? In terms of what people could do and how it was supporting financial fraud. And the idea that fear has created such a barrier to some research that could be done. And right, the idea that HIPAA, as amazing as it is, as a kind of privacy tool, as a insurance protection tool, is such a barrier to pure research and what could be done if we didn't have some of these barriers. I mean, everybody had an idea, and I could follow a patient's journey across payer systems and across clinicians and experiences. And I've just seen some of the capability there. So the idea that we find out too late where we've exposed ourselves, I think it's more just part of the design of your transformation thinks about, all right, where are their vulnerabilities and how can I shore it up? What I would say is, I think there's great capabilities. I know, sounds like David, your firm does this. Our firm does a lot this in kind of cybersecurity and risk controls. There are great capabilities and learnings. It's a matter of how do you best apply them to your problem or to your challenge as you transform. So that's kind of what would keep me up at night, is people just ignoring it and just thinking about, hey, there's exciting new tech. Let's see how quickly we can get there, and not thinking about what it might open up.
Yeah, it's funny because you don't do that in any other area of the business, right? You don't just start taking on stuff before you've thought it through and thought of consequences and fast forwarded. How's it going to impact other departments in the organization or your client base or whatever the case may be.
It should be noted that if our IT group was watching, they'd say I'm the worst at this, by the way, because I'm so excited about the technology. I'm jumping right in, but I do know, do what I say, not what I do.
And Tim?
I'm glad nobody said security, because so apart from security, one of the other things that really keeps me up at night is it's innovation. And what I mean is somebody takes an expensive Runyon survey and turns their innovation shop into a Vegas trade show, and I see this happening in a lot of various organizations. I'll go to conferences and I'll see a lot of this where there's a lot of chasing after squirrels, going back to earlier comments of, hey, there's this new toy coming out. Let's go ahead and try and cram this down a business unit's throat. And the reason this keeps me up is because if innovators as a whole get a reputation of doing this, it's going to be much harder to fund true innovation. The trust will be harder to acquire in order to Scott's point, give the innovative teams a wide berth to do what they do best. So those are some of the things that really keep me up.
All right. Very good. It's been a good chat. I'm sure we could extend this over a drink or a meal or something and just keep going, but we're at 12:45. Tracy, did you want to jump back in and address the questions in the chat?
Sure. So I'm going to go back to George. The case that you had, what was the industry?
Yeah, in this case, the specific use case was a member organization. So somebody who, has members that renew, and it's valuable for me to have a member renew. And if I can understand what drives them to either renew or defect, I can perhaps compel them. Maybe it's the right timing of a promotion. Maybe it's better engagement techniques, but that was kind of the industry. I did see the question of speaking to how would I think about that for a technology company or manufacturing. I think there's absolutely kind of applicability or parallels, with technology company. Anybody who is a SaaS type, has a SaaS type engagement or product, this is critical. I mean, when we think about valuations and how these companies gain value, it's really about that predictable stream of revenue, and understanding that in the context of how your users enroll and disenroll is tremendously valuable. And all we try to do is we kind of hope, right? We hope they stay, we hope we keep a good percentage of them. And I'm a big believer in that hope is not a strategy. Let's think about how we understand what's driving it using these data sets and see what we can do to compel the behavior that's optimal.
So if I can take that one step farther, and then we'll come back and hit some of the other questions. Differences between, so a member-based organization may or may be a nonprofit versus small business versus big business. Scott, in your world, startups versus Tim, insurance companies, kind of big cos. Somebody referenced, being able to, I think it was Dave referenced, levels the playing field for the smart guys if they can figure out how to use some of these techs and the data that's there. Be interested on all your thoughts on how smaller companies can leverage these new technologies. And if you're a small company and that's not a startup kind of mind, going out on the limb to go to some of these bleeding edge techs feels scary. So thoughts on that?
I guess from the small startup world, you have no choice but to utilize the existing cloud platforms and their services to do what you need to do. You don't have the big software teams internally to take advantage of those. And honestly, the bigger companies need to follow that same pattern. So that's how, honestly, the smaller companies need to solve this problem. And they're doing it now in the startup world.
Yeah, I think if anything, the risk of being a large company is you lose some of your nimbleness, and it becomes really difficult to kind of change, the course of the super tanker versus I've got my little raft and I can move quickly. So I think, it's exciting in that some of these capabilities give me things that in the past used to take a big company to invest in a data science department or a market research department, et cetera. And now I have the ability to kind of subscribe to those services and employ them at a scale that's appropriate without that massive investment. So I think that's something that big companies have to watch out for, is kind of being a victim of their own success and not recognizing that they're on the downside of their innovation curve, and they become, Kodak, right? Which was a great American success story. And now, you can look at that stock chart, it's pretty dramatic. So I think that's the risk of the larger companies is kind of, they still have to think about innovation in a nimble way.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. When you think about disruptive strategy throughout history, and everything from micro mills replacing the big steel mills, or the Targets replacing the Macy's and the Sears, there's a million case studies on these types of things. I think as a large organization, you can't stop innovating, and you need to remember that when you do have innovative teams, you need to structure them correctly so that they can do true proof of value without, still maintaining the type of security rigor you need, but without, being so process heavy as though you were trying to do a full enterprise implementation. Being very intentional and methodical about how you stand things up, and then what that handover from proof of value stand up is to truly scale. I think it's good for, and that's something that that I'm bringing some of my colleagues in to take a look at, is it's good to have a pulse on the current startup world. And so I'm also a mentor for startups, and it helps keep my edge sharp so I don't fall into that enterprise level complacency. So I remember what it takes to truly, unpack these ideas, and what it takes to fight off both the any incumbents, but also the self-doubt, because you'll face those even in large enterprise organizations.
Well, and if you don't mind me adding on, I was going to touch on Noel's comment about co-ops. I think bringing on co-ops is great for innovation, because they're the young kids, they're the ones that are energized, and making them part of the team, not just giving them menial tasks, making them part of the team and making sure that they have a voice, and really listening to them, because they're the ones that are up and comers. They're the ones that are exposed to the newer technologies in college or just in their social lives. Including them as part of the team, which I've done for years now, really keeps that innovation going. And I encourage anybody from startups to the well-established multi-billion-dollar company to have really strong co-op programs that the co-ops are very involved in day to day.
Yeah, Scott, you're exactly right. One of the questions that I've gotten sometimes is, well, how can we really leverage a student? They don't have a lot of institutional insurance knowledge. And for me, I always like to lean back on a good quote, and that's the Einstein quote of, "I'm not interested in the person with all the answers. I'm interested in the person with all the questions," or some permutation thereof. With students, it's they're non-institutionalized. It's that unbridled, not fearful thinking that really can blaze trails. And even if in the course of explaining, let's say in the insurance industry, explaining some nuance of insurance, and the student is asking questions, I can't tell you how many times someone's just paused and go, dang, why do we do that? That is really stupid. So it's also a great point of self-reflection too.
Yeah, I think, and I have to agree that the students, the fact that they don't have the institutional knowledge is great because they're the ones that can ask the question why or why not. That, oh, to your point, well, we always have done it that way. Why did we start doing it? Yeah, for sure.
Anyone who's a parent knows that that the young can be a good mirror, whether we like it or not.
Yeah, that is definitely all too true. What about Keith's question about tools that would allow you to capture the effectiveness measurements of controls that are written into procedures? Any thoughts or feedback on that? And if I'm not doing your question justice, Keith, hop on in here.
No, it's a very practical question. You know, we've got, I love the idea coming from the construction industry lately. You've got all these new effectiveness measurement tools. You can see what the compliance is with your procedures, but what tools do we have available to connect all the dots? You've got all this data in the form of effectiveness measurements. They are part of the controls, and the controls are written into the procedures. How do you tie that all together? What tools are out there?
Yeah, it's a really interesting question, Keith. And I don't think there's a silver bullet. I think it starts with that curiosity around, hey, how do I know this is working? This is the right level. One example I've seen in terms of when we think about companies that are selling on the internet, and they're trying to manage fraud, and an interesting application of AI in fraud detection. But we kind of ask the question of like, hey, what's the goal here, right? What are we really trying to do when it comes to managing fraud? And I'll get some eager executive that'll say, we want to eliminate fraud. And like, that is extremely easy to do. We're going to go unplug your web server, no more fraud. And like, is it really your goal to eliminate fraud? Or is there an acceptable level where you're going to have profit in excess of the fraud? So part of it, you know, we kind of think about it as that, what's that method detection level, or what's the kind of acceptable level where if I'm thinking about, there's a parabola there and it's a maximization problem. Like, hey, can I maximize performance, effectiveness, throughput with controls that catch enough that I'm not compromising these things that could be cost, whether it's safety or quality or, you know, financial risk. I think so. It starts with just asking those questions at a process level. But I think it's a good question. There's a tool opportunity there. I would say I personally haven't come across anything that's great there. It starts more with just good analysis.
Thanks, George. Appreciate that.
You're on mute, Trace.
Yeah, we're coming up to close to the hour. So I want to thank everyone for your participation here. Really appreciate it. George, Scott, Tim, great discussion. Dave, again, thanks for moderating and being our sponsor throughout the year. Noel, make sure your students show up to Tech Takeover January 20th. There'll be a good time and opportunity for them to mix and mingle. I think I'll wrap up by going totally left field. Start with David. What's your favorite holiday tradition?
Oh, that is a great question. I'm not a very good favorites guy because I usually have multiple things, but I think it was 2 years ago, or maybe it was last year, we had a vendor that we had done a lot of business with that let us pick these different packages. So you could get